Midsummer in the Yorkshire countryside, a private backyard barbecue party. The charcoal smoke perfumed the entire lawn with the scent of roasting meat, and relatives sat around wicker tables and chairs, chatting and joking. My 5-year-old son Elliot clutched the hem of my linen dress, his eyes fixed on the sizzling beef burgers on the grill. Timidly, he tugged at his uncle's sleeve. "Uncle, could I have a burger?" My younger brother Finn, holding a chilled lager, glanced sideways at the child and deliberately raised his voice so everyone present could hear clearly. "This burger isn't for just anyone. It's only for children who have a future, who will make something of themselves. Your Elliot is average at best, he'll never amount to anything. He doesn't deserve it." Not a single relative spoke up for us. Uncle, aunt, grandparents all nodded in agreement, and some even chimed in, each remark a mockery of Elliot's destined mediocrity. Elliot's eyes reddened instantly. He bit his lip, too afraid to cry, and buried his face in my lap, hurt and bewildered. My heart felt as if it had been seared by the hot coals. I gripped the edge of our plate so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't argue. Silently, I picked up our empty plates, took Elliot's hand, and walked out of that country house without a word. Behind us, the laughter and jeers of the relatives still floated in the air. That night I didn't sleep. I gritted my teeth and fought with all my might, raising Elliot alone. For 15 full years, I never set foot in any of Finn's gatherings again. At 11:55 p.m., a strange text message lit up my long-silent phone. It was from Finn, the same man who had humiliated us in public all those years ago. "Remember that barbecue, the burger only for kids with a future? Now your son." I frowned and opened the attached photo. On the screen, Elliot, dressed in a tailored suit and holding a multi-million-pound project for a London-listed company, stood on stage receiving an award at an industry gala. In stark contrast, Finn's own good-for-nothing, debt-ridden son was huddled in a corner of the ballroom, shabbily dressed, working as a temporary odd-job boy. That short message tore open the true face of the relatives' callousness and indifference from all those years ago. Belated shame and endless regret crashed down on Finn and his entire family. That night I sat on the floor of my rented apartment. The wallpaper was peeling greenish-grey flakes, and outside the window was the perpetually grey sky of suburban Leeds. Elliot had cried himself to sleep on the sofa, his lashes still wet with tears, his breath occasionally hitching with a sob. I opened my phone's photo album and scrolled to a family portrait taken earlier that year. Finn, holding his newborn son, stood at the center, relatives clustered around him like sunflowers, while Elliot was squeezed to the very edge, showing only half a timid eye. I deleted that photo. Then I deleted every relative's contact information. At 3 in the morning, I emailed my resignation to the law firm, took out all my savings, and enrolled in the financial consultant training course that had once rejected me. What followed felt like life on fast forward. By day I stood behind a supermarket till, my fingertips calloused from plastic coins, while earbuds fed me financial analysis podcasts. At night, after Elliot fell asleep, I slogged through 50 finance textbooks on a second-hand laptop, the blue glow of the screen burning red veins into my eyes. Finn's family lived in the next block. A few times I ran into Finn's wife at the corner supermarket, pushing a pram full of organic baby food. Her eyes scanned my frayed cuffs, and a knowing smile played on her lips. As she turned, the hem of her satin coat swept across the shelves, trailing a whiff of rose perfume. I gripped my shopping basket until my knuckles cracked, then steered clear of the expensive imported snacks and went to weigh the bulk oats. When Elliot turned 7, I passed my first financial charter exam and jumped to a mid-sized investment firm. My salary tripled, and we moved from the basement apartment to a small terraced house with a garden. Meanwhile, news of Finn's promotion came through. He had become vice president of the family business. Finn's wife's social media feeds exploded with photos of new Birkin bags and their son's private school uniform. In the family group chat, my aunt shared a picture of Finn's new yacht with the caption, "Our Finn has always been the most promising one," and my grandparents added heart emojis below. I left the group and placed my phone face down on Elliot's little desk. Elliot was working on maths competition problems, his pencil tip tearing through the rough paper. He looked up and asked, "Mummy, was Uncle wrong?" Will I really never amount to anything? His pupils reflected the cold light of the energy-saving bulb, and a smear of tomato sauce from lunch still clung to the tip of his nose. I crouched down to meet his eyes and gently closed his problem sets. Elliot, amounting to something isn't something others decide for you. Just remember, Mummy will always believe in you. He nodded, not fully understanding, but he never asked that question again. In middle school, Elliot became obsessed with astronomy. He covered his bedroom ceiling with star charts and stayed up until dawn using a second-hand telescope to observe the Orion Nebula. Neighbors complained to the school about the light pollution. I shielded him from all the criticism and helped him convert the garage roof into an observation deck. That same year, Finn's son was hailed by the media as a prodigy pianist, and photos from family gatherings circulated from London to Edinburgh, each accompanied by comments like the family's pride. I uninstalled all social media apps and used the saved data allowance to subscribe Elliot to Nature magazine online. The summer Elliot graduated from high school, he won a full scholarship to Cambridge's physics department. On the day the acceptance letter arrived, I took a half-day off and treated him to Nando's. He sat across from me, dissecting chicken wings with surgical precision, but his lips were curved in a wide grin. Someone at the next table recognized him as the gold medalist of last year's national physics competition and pulled out a phone to snap a picture. Elliot lowered his voice. "Mum, if Uncle could see me now." I added another piece of grilled corn to his plate and said, "It doesn't matter now." What really brought everything to the surface was that night, 15 years later. The cold light of my phone screen illuminated the new fine lines around my eyes. Every word in Finn's text felt like it had been re-roasted in an oven. The photo was high resolution enough to make out the embroidered initials on Elliot's tie and, in the shadowy corner, Finn's son bending over to collect champagne glasses, the cheap synthetic label of his shirt showing at the cuff. I zoomed in and noticed the worn-out shoes on Finn's son. The sole was peeling, revealing a grey-black lining. I recognized that style from the supermarket discount bin. My phone buzzed again with a second message from Finn. "Sis, can we meet tomorrow?" I stared at the word sis for a few seconds. In 15 years, he had never reached out to me. Family gatherings had always excluded me, and even my grandmother's funeral had been communicated via a lawyer. My finger hovered over the screen. Elliot's award-winning photo looped. He stood in the spotlight, flanked by some of London's most influential investment partners, the crystal trophy casting glints of light across his jawline, overlapping with the image of him curled up in my arms crying at age 5. In the end, I didn't reply. I put the phone on silent and tossed it into the bedside drawer. But Finn's text was like a fuse, igniting a cascade of memories sealed away for 15 years. The next morning, I went to the corner bakery for a croissant. The wind chime tinkled as I pushed the door open, and there behind the counter stood Finn's wife. Her hair was cut short, revealing stark grey roots. Her fingers, once manicured with nude polish, now gripped a bamboo pastry clamp, swollen and red at the knuckles. When she saw me, the colour drained from her face, and the clamp clattered onto the glass counter. "You." Her voice was scratchy as sandpaper on rough pottery. "I took over this shop 3 months ago. I didn't know you lived nearby." As she spoke, her eyes kept drifting to my wristwatch, Elliot's birthday gift from last year, its dial set with tiny diamonds that caught the morning light and scattered tiny rainbows. I bought a plain croissant and counted out the exact change onto the counter. She stared at the coins, dazed. At that barbecue 15 years ago, she had mocked me for counting pennies, unable to afford organic beef for Elliot. As I pushed the door to leave, she rushed out after me, flour dusting her apron, stumbling a step in the mist. "Finn, his company went bankrupt last month. The courts froze everything. She faltered, her eyes reddening. Now that Elliot has done so well, I know Finn's words back then were harsh, but after all, we're family. I clutched the croissant bag. The morning breeze filled my collar, and I could almost smell again the charcoal smoke from that Yorkshire lawn. The feel of 5-year-old Elliot clutching my dress hem still lingered on my fingers. The faces of those relatives laughing in agreement were like decayed tooth roots, painful at the slightest touch. I turned back to look at her. Behind her, the The bakery window reflected my own face, thinner than 15 years ago, cheekbones prominent, eyes sunken, but my gaze was calm, like a tide retreating. "The croissant is good," I said. "But Elliot only eats the sourdough from that French bakery on Manhattan's Upper East Side." I turned and walked into the mist, not looking back at her expression. Behind me, the wind chimes clattered in quick succession, probably as she retreated into the shop. A stray cat huddled by a bin at the corner. I broke off half the croissant and placed it in front of it. The cat sniffed, then grabbed it and vanished into the bushes. At the office, after handling the merger contracts, I opened the long-dormant family group chat during my lunch break. The last message was from 5 years ago, my grandmother's obituary. Scrolling up, I saw Finn's wife had posted a yacht holiday photo with the caption, "The meaning of family is supporting each other," and my aunt had replied, "Finn has always been our pride." Now there were 2 new comments below that post. My younger cousin had added 3 shocked emojis, and my uncle had written, "How things change." I closed the chat and texted Elliot, "Did the awards go well last night?" He replied instantly with a selfie against the New York skyline, morning light pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows. He was holding a coffee cup, cufflinks engraved with his company's founding year. "Mum, the board just approved my quantum computing financial model proposal. Launch next year." The caption was followed by 3 rocket emojis. I zoomed in and saw dark circles under his eyes, another all-nighter, no doubt, but his smile was genuine, that boyish delight he'd had when he cracked the hardest problem as a child. That evening, when I got home, there was an unmarked envelope in the mailbox. Craft paper, stamp askew, postmarked from Yorkshire. I opened it and found a faded Polaroid, that barbecue party 15 years ago, little Elliot crouched on the lawn poking at an anthill, sunlight turning his hair a pale gold. On the back, in ballpoint pen, were the words "I'm sorry," the handwriting trembling, as if the writer's hand had been unsteady. I recognized it as my grandmother's script. Her hands had trembled badly in her last year. She must have hidden this away and had it posted after her death. Also in the envelope was a neatly folded note. "That day I was too afraid to speak up, for fear Finn would cut off my allowance. My child, I owe you a public defense." I tucked the Polaroid into my journal and placed the note under the lamp base. Outside, the sky darkened, and streetlights glowed warm yellow. The smell of stew drifted from the neighbor's kitchen. My phone buzzed again, this time an incoming call from an unknown number, Yorkshire area code. I answered. A long silence, then Finn's voice, hoarser than 15 years ago, as if his throat were full of lead. "Sis, I heard Elliot's quantum model project is looking for a UK partner. I'm bankrupt now, but I still have connections. Could I?" I listened to his hesitant pauses, imagining his fingers twisting the phone. A bird fluttered past the window, its shadow crossing the note under the lamp. "Finn," I cut in, "Elliot's team selection criteria are based on technical strength, not personal connections." He drew a sharp breath, probably about to try a different approach, but I didn't give him the chance. "But if you're interested, you can send me your CV and I'll forward it to HR. There's still an opening for an entry-level analyst." A long silence. Then Finn's voice dropped, carrying a broken quality, "Entry-level analyst. Sis, I was a vice president of a public company." I let out a soft laugh, as light as a page turning. "Vice president? Finn, didn't you say back then that burgers were only for kids with a future? The opportunity is here. Take it or leave it." He eventually mumbled a reluctant okay, and as the call ended, I could hear Finn's wife sobbing in the background. I sank into the sofa and felt something small under the cushion, a red Lego brick that Elliot had chewed on as a child, leaving tiny teeth marks. That night 15 years ago I had deleted all my relatives' contacts, but I couldn't delete the tangled knots of blood ties. Now Finn's call had spread those knots out before me, asking me whether to cut them or untie them. Late that night, Elliot video called me from New York, where it was midday and the sun was so bright he was squinting. "Mum, I heard about Uncle," he said, and the screen switched to his email inbox. His wife sent me a LinkedIn message this morning, very sincere, asking me to give my cousin a chance at an internship. I sat up straight and saw Elliot's calm expression, his right hand twirling a pen, his thinking habit. What do you think? I asked. He clicked the pen shut and switched the camera back to his face. His eyes, clear and bright in the sunlight, said, "Mum, I remembered what he said when I was 5 for a long time. But standing on that stage last night, I suddenly realized those words can't hurt me anymore." He paused. The faint sound of New York traffic came through the window. I saw my cousin in the corner of the ballroom, collecting champagne glasses. He dropped out of high school, was forced to play piano until his wrists were ruined, and now he wants to go back to university for computer science. If Uncle had given him a choice back then. I looked at the faint scar above Elliot's eyebrow. He had got it falling off his bike at age 8, when Finn was throwing a lavish birthday party. I couldn't afford a private tutor, so I treated it myself with gauze and iodine. He had been sweating with pain but gritted his teeth and said, "Mummy, I can get better by myself." Now that same child, sitting in the tallest office building in New York, was considering giving an internship to the son of the man who had humiliated him. "Your decision," I said. "But remember, kindness is your choice, not something you owe anyone." Elliot smiled, a smile that carried the warmth of someone who had walked through darkness. "I know. Mum, I'll fly back this weekend and take my cousin's CV to see some old classmates in computer science." Just before he hung up, he leaned close to the camera and lowered his voice. "Oh, and I sent a box of that French sourdough to Aunt. She sent me a voice message yesterday, cried for half an hour." I smiled and ended the call. Outside, the night was thick as ink. Finn's CV had already arrived in my inbox. I opened it and scanned it quickly. All those VP titles that once made him so smug were now piled up as pale footnotes. What really stood out was the barren skills section, just team management and strategic planning, with no concrete project achievements, no innovation, no measurable results. 15 years ago, when he stood at the center of the family gathering, he probably never imagined that those hollow words on his CV would one day be scrutinized and found wanting. The next morning, I went to the bakery for milk. Finn's wife was behind the counter, kneading dough, her movements still clumsy, flour dusted across half her face. When she saw me, she instinctively straightened her back, wiping her flour-coated fingers on her apron. Finn sent his CV last night," she said, her voice strained as if she feared it would shatter if she relaxed. "Did you receive it?" I took a pint of whole milk and placed it on the counter, pulling out the exact change. "Yes. HR will handle it as per procedure." She took the coins with trembling fingers, those same fingers that had once held champagne flutes with nude polished nails, now red and cracked, with flour embedded under the nails. I looked at her hands a moment longer. She quickly pulled them back into her apron pocket, her eyes glistening. As I pushed the door to leave, the wind chime tinkled, and she called after me, "Sis." Her voice trailing off, trembling like a wounded bird's last flutter. I paused at the door, the morning breeze carrying exhaust fumes and the scent of pancakes washing in from outside, thinning her voice. Without turning around, I said, "The dough needs enough time to rise, or the bread will be hard." Behind me, her suppressed sobs were barely audible under the hum of the dough mixer. That afternoon, Elliot's flight landed at Heathrow, and I drove to pick him up. When he emerged from arrivals, I almost didn't recognize him, leaner than in the videos, but his shoulders were broader. His tailored suit jacket was slung over his arm, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a finance magazine. When he spotted me, he crossed the distance in 3 quick strides and gave me a hug that carried the scent of jet fuel and aftershave. "Mum, I sent my cousin's CV to the department head. He said they can start with a remote assistant project to test the waters." He pulled back, his eyes shining, and took a velvet box from his pocket. "I brought you a present." Inside was a necklace with a star-shaped sapphire pendant, refracting deep oceanic light under the parking garage lights. "I designed it myself. The star represents Orion," he said, a little embarrassed, scratching the back of his head. "When I was little and we watched the stars together, I remember you always said you wanted a star you could wear around your neck." I bowed my head and let him fasten the chain. The cool metal clasp settled against my collarbone, like the faint breeze from that old laptop's cooling fan 15 years ago. In the rearview mirror, I saw the smile lines around my eyes reflected alongside his youthful, confident profile. As we drove out of the airport, He took a work call, switching fluidly between English and occasional Mandarin terminology. Listening to him, I remembered when he was 8, reading astronomy journal articles to me in halting English, mangling nebula into nebula, then looking up to ask, "Mummy, did I read it right?" When we got home, there was a cardboard box on the doorstep, no return address. Inside were stacks of handwritten letters from those Yorkshire relatives I hadn't seen in 15 years. My aunt wrote, "I was foolish back then, joining in to hurt you and Elliot." My uncle wrote, "Elliot is now the pride of our whole family, Finn doesn't deserve him." My cousin wrote, "I've been afraid to contact you, fearing you'd resent me." My grandfather's letter was just 2 lines, the handwriting shaky. "Don't forgive Finn, but let me see Elliot just once." Elliot crouched by the box, read each letter, then arranged them alphabetically by surname, as if organizing project documents. He looked up at me calmly. "Mum, Aunt's return address is a nursing home. She had a stroke last year." I took the letter and saw the crooked handwriting, the tail strokes dragging into long ink trails. On the back of the paper, a tiny line read, "My greatest regret in life is not speaking up for you and Elliot in that yard." Late that night, Elliot and I sat on the living room floor, just as we had when he was 5, except now he was a head taller than me, his legs stretching to the opposite wall. He held the Polaroid from Grandma under the light, tracing the "I'm sorry" on the back with his thumb. "Grandma secretly sent me pocket money," he said. "Every birthday, under a different name, so Uncle wouldn't find out." He pulled up an old photo on his phone, an astronomy atlas he'd received at age 12, with the words "to the brightest star" written in ballpoint on the flyleaf. The handwriting matched the "I'm sorry." I suddenly remembered the day of Grandma's funeral. I had stood at the back of the church, not going in, watching Finn in his suit deliver the eulogy, his voice booming as if he were chairing a board meeting. I had believed Grandma had sided with Finn until the very end. Now I understood that she had quietly held an umbrella for Elliot, in ways I couldn't see. 15 years of pocket money and a single "I'm sorry" hidden in an envelope. "Let's go visit Grandma's grave this weekend," Elliot said, carefully tucking the Polaroid into his wallet. "And bring that atlas." I nodded. Moonlight slanted through the window, casting the steady gleam of his award photo confidence into the room. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a message from Finn. "Sis, HR said my interview is next week. I've prepared some materials, could you take a look?" Attached was a revised CV, with a few concrete data points added under project experience. Still thin, but at least no longer filled with hollow jargon. Elliot glanced over and smirked. "He's going for an entry-level analyst." He raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I can lend him my set of practice tests. I did 300 of those before my internship." I watched him get up and head to the study for the test packs. His suit jacket lay on the arm of the sofa, its inner lining embroidered with his company logo, the threads gleaming silver in the moonlight. That 5-year-old boy, whose eyes had reddened at the word "unworthy," was now voluntarily preparing study materials for the very man who had shamed him. The aroma of Elliot's freshly brewed coffee filled the living room, a world away from the instant powder I'd used during my late-night study sessions. Now it was Colombian beans, the burr grinder humming a low, pleasant note. Finn's interview was scheduled for the following Wednesday, and Elliot adjusted his schedule to fly back to London and accompany me to the office to observe. That morning, as I stood in the wardrobe choosing a shirt, Elliot leaned against the doorframe. "Mum, wear that sapphire blue one. Uncle used to say blue makes people look sharp." I pulled out the sapphire blue silk shirt from the back of the closet. It still had the tag on. I'd bought it 15 years ago and never found an occasion to wear it, always feeling I wasn't important enough for it. Now, as I fastened the cuffs, the mirror reflected a version of myself far more polished than 15 years ago, the star-shaped sapphire pendant swaying gently at my throat. The interview was held in the 11th floor conference room of the headquarters building. Elliot and I sat in the waiting area outside the glass partition. Through the one-way glass, we could see Finn sitting across from the interviewer, wearing an obviously new dark grey suit, the label still on the sleeve, his tie slightly askew. He sat hunched in the ergonomic chair, a far cry from the man who had stood at that barbecue, beer belly out, rapping his knuckles on the table to emphasize "unworthy." When the interviewer asked about the cause of his company's bankruptcy, He paused for a moment, then said, I overexpanded, neglected cash flow management, and I dismissed dissenting voices within the team. Elliot let out a soft hum beside me, scrolling on his tablet to pull up Finn's written test, 6 to 7% correct, barely passing. But on a risk assessment essay question, he had answered in remarkable detail, even citing a model framework that Elliot's company had published the previous year. He's studied our technical documents, Elliot murmured, surprised. His interpretation is shallow, but he's willing to learn. When the interview ended, Finn walked out and saw us. He froze on the spot. He seemed to have shrunk from 15 years ago, shoulders narrower, cheeks hollow, temples patchy with grey. He opened his mouth, his gaze shifting from my blue shirt to Elliot's tailored suit, then fixed on Elliot's face, a face that both echoed and diverged from the timid 5-year-old he remembered, now with a strong brow and steady eyes, carrying the sharp gleam of a young entrepreneur. Elliot. His voice scraped like sandpaper over rusted iron. You've grown up. Elliot stood up, half a head taller, extending his hand. His cufflink caught the corridor light. Uncle, welcome to the team. I'll have my assistant send you the onboarding materials. Finn's hand trembled as he shook it. I could see the wet gleam at the corners of his eyes. His lips moved several times before he finally managed a choked thank you. I watched from the side, the star-shaped sapphire cool against my collarbone. At the end of the corridor, a cleaner pushed a trolley past, the wheels rumbling over the floor, overlapping and diverging with the jeers from that barbecue 15 years ago. Finn released Elliot's hand and turned to me, his lips struggling to form words. Sis, that burger back then. I cut him off, that's in the past. Outside, clouds parted and sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting alternating stripes of light and shadow on the corridor floor, right between Finn and me. I stepped half a pace forward, letting my shadow overlap his. But what Elliot remembers will become part of his decision-making, and so will yours. Finn stared at the floor stripes, his Adam's apple bobbing several times. Finally, he clutched his briefcase strap and walked toward the lift, his silhouette shrinking into a small dark grey dot at the end of the corridor. As the lift doors closed, I saw him raise his sleeve to wipe his face. Elliot placed a warm hand on my shoulder. Mum, let's have dinner at that French bakery tonight. I had the Paris branch air freight fresh sourdough. He grinned, shaking his phone. Aunt said she's taking a leave from the nursing home today to apologize to us in person. I pressed the lift button. The metal doors reflected our mother and son figures side by side, sapphire blue shirt and silver grey suit, like two trees that had grown from the same poor soil, now stretching their branches toward their own sunlight. As the lift descended, the floor numbers ticked down, like time flowing backwards, 15, 10, 5, 1. The doors opened with a ding, and the bustle of the lobby flooded in, people rushing by with coffee, someone loudly discussing project milestones on their phone, sunlight pouring through the glass dome, bathing the whole space in a warm gold. Elliot suddenly grabbed my wrist and pulled an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket. Oh, and I found this tucked inside Grandma's atlas last night. The envelope was yellowed, postmarked 13 years ago, addressed to Elliot Lynn, the sender's address showing Grandma's nursing home. I opened it to find a handmade birthday card for his 10th birthday. The day you were born, the nurse said your cry was loud enough to lift the roof. I knew then that this child's light couldn't be dimmed. Grandma couldn't defend you in public, but I prayed for you every night. Elliot took the card, read it, folded it back into the envelope. So, he said, lifting his head, his eyes in the sunlight the color of pale amber, Mum, we were never really fighting alone. The lobby clock struck 12 noon. Sunlight shifted to our feet, casting two shadows across the polished marble floor. My phone buzzed again, Finn's wife this time, with a photo of a freshly baked loaf. Sis, I let the dough rise an extra 20 minutes, and it came out softer. If Elliot comes back, let him taste his auntie's baking. I zoomed in on the lopsided sourdough, uneven scoring, patchy browning, but in the corner I could see her cracked hand giving an okay sign. Elliot peered at the photo and laughed. Auntie's bread looks even rougher than my first business plan. He handed the phone back, took my wrist, and steered us toward the car park. Come on, Aunt is waiting at the bakery. She sent a voice message saying she brought that barbecue group photo to tear up in front of you. As the scent of the Parisian sourdough filled the car, I touched the facetted edges of the star sapphire at my neck. The same fingers that had deleted all my relatives' contacts 15 years ago now gripped the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, Elliot's profile was bent over his work, the sun cutting through the grey city skyline like a knife slicing open an old canvas to reveal fresh golden lining beneath. The bakery windows were misted with condensation. Aunt sat by the window in her wheelchair, her walking stick propped beside her, her hair completely white. When she saw us, she lunged forward, her stick thumping against the floor tiles, her eyes instantly red. On the table lay that barbecue group photo, its lamination slightly worn, but Finn's smug face and his son's hurried champagne glass collection were starkly clear in the sunlight. Aunt pushed the photo toward us with trembling hands, traces of old nail polish remained on her fingernails. "Tear it up," she said, her voice thick with phlegm, her words slurred from the stroke. "I've kept this photo making me sick for 15 years. Today, in front of you both." She reached for the photo, but Elliot gently pressed her wrist. With his other hand, he flipped the photo over, the back was blank. "Aunt," he said softly, "the back can be written on anew." Aunt froze. Tears ran down the creases of her face, dripping onto the photo's lamination and blurring Finn's face. She pulled a marker from her side pocket, her hand shaking as she wrote "I'm sorry" on the back, the trembling strokes just like Grandma's. Elliot took his own pen from his suit pocket and added a small line beside it, "With enough rising time, bread becomes soft." I watched from across the table. My phone screen lit up with another photo from Finn's wife, her son, the one who had been collecting champagne glasses in the corner, now sat before a computer, the screen showing a coding tutorial page, with a dog-eared copy of Python for beginners beside it. Her caption read, "He says he wants to apply to Imperial College's computer science department next year." Elliot helped him connect with a mentor, and they passed the video interview today. The afternoon sun slanted in, illuminating the golden crust of the sourdough, turning Aunt's silver hair warm, and catching the silver embroidery on Elliot's jacket. I glanced down at my sapphire blue shirt. 15 years I'd never dared to wear it. Now its cuff bore a coffee stain and the necklace had left faint creases at the collar, but sitting here in the sunlight, it felt more fitting than ever. My phone buzzed one last time, a scan of Grandma's birthday card, which Elliot had secretly photographed and posted to the family group chat. The chat fell silent for a few minutes, then messages began flooding in. My cousin posted 3 crying emojis. My uncle uploaded an old photo of 3-year-old Elliot on grandfather's shoulders, picking cherries. My grandfather sent a voice message that, when played, held the old man's broken sobs and mumbled repetitions of "I'm so sorry." Elliot turned his phone screen toward me. The sunlight fell directly on the chat interface, filling the dialog box with crying faces and apologetic stickers. At the bottom, Finn had sent a new message, time-stamped a minute ago. "Sis, Elliot, next Saturday is my son's coding course final presentation. Can you come? The address is the old house in Yorkshire, the backyard." I looked up. Pigeons fluttered past the bakery sign. Elliot had turned the photo back to the front and was studying the corner where Finn's son was shown collecting champagne glasses, grimy and downcast. He picked up the marker and drew a tiny star beside that figure. "Mum," he turned to me, his eyes carrying the same brightness as 15 years ago when he aimed his second-hand telescope at Orion, "shall we go?" I picked up my now-cold Earl Grey tea, took a sip. The tea blended with the sourdough's malty aroma and the faint scent of Aunt's ointment. Outside, the clouds parted, revealing a sky as blue as the banquet backdrop in Elliot's award photo. And the charcoal smoke from that Yorkshire backyard seemed to drift back across the 15 years, but this time it mixed with the scent of properly proofed bread, and a tiny star drawn in the corner of a photograph. The sunlight made the amber film on the surface of my cooled Earl Grey gleam brightly. I set down the bone china cup, and the clink of cup against saucer was a delicate chime, like the sound of Elliot's tears hitting the plate edge 15 years ago, now polished by time into something clearer. Elliot was still waiting for my answer. His pale amber eyes in the afternoon light were clear, with faint red veins at the corners from late-night work, but the light in his pupils was clearer than the sky outside. "Yes." I pushed the cup to the center of the table. But I have one condition: we need a new grill in the backyard, the charcoal must be fully lit, the burger patties should be wagyu, and the buns must be sourdough buns made from the bread you sent back. Since we're recreating the scene, the ingredients ought to be upgraded. Aunt let out a throaty chuckle, still with a bright, youthful ring to it. She tapped the floor with her walking stick. I'll handle the side dishes. After my stroke, the only thing I've perfected is my Michelin-level onion cutting technique. She lifted her left hand to demonstrate a chopping motion, her fingers still curled slightly, but the movement was precise. Elliot immediately took out his phone and created a group chat, adding Finn, his wife, aunt, my cousin, and grandfather, naming it Backyard Barbecue 2.0. Finn replied instantly, "I'll buy the grill, double deck, with temperature control." Finn's wife sent a voice message, her voice nasal with emotion, "I'll knead the bread, this time I'll let it rise long enough." My cousin dropped a crying Shiba Inu sticker with an "I'm sorry" sign, followed by, "I'll bring dessert, triple layer molten chocolate cake." Grandfather was silent in the chat for a long while, then finally sent a photo of a handwritten note, his hard-penned characters still trembling, "I'll bring cherries." Elliot loved sitting on my shoulders to pick cherries from that tree in the backyard. In the corner of that photo, a corner of a yellowed calendar was visible, dated to the week before he was bedridden with his stroke. The next 6 days flew by as if on fast forward. Every afternoon, Elliot and my cousin connected online to debug the coding project, bickering across the screen, my cousin explaining algorithm logic in his Yorkshire-accented English, Elliot responding in Mandarin with a Beijing flavor, interspersed with occasional financial jargon. From the kitchen, I'd listen in while kneading dough and smile. Finn's wife sent daily voice updates on her sourdough starter, from its bubbling to the sour smell is right to today I baked the first test bun. It cracked on top but the crumb structure is okay. On Friday evening, I drove Elliot north to Yorkshire. The boot was packed with the sourdough burger buns he'd air freighted, a box of wagyu patties, and Grandma's astronomy atlas along with the barbecue photo now inscribed on the back. As we left London, the sunset painted the skyline in rose gold. Elliot reclined the passenger seat, knees up, scrolling through my cousin's code on his phone, line by line. "The kid's got talent," he said suddenly, swiping across the screen. 3 weeks ago his variable names were a mess, now this recursive logic is cleaner than what our newest intern writes. I glanced at him, catching the fields of rapeseed flowers blurring past on both sides, a golden expanse stretching to the horizon, a stark contrast to the grey darkness of the night we'd fled Yorkshire 15 years ago. "The day you came back from winning the physics competition gold medal, you were lying just like this, with your problem set on your knees, saying, 'Mum, this solution could be optimized.' Back then I thought the whole world was a competition," he said, putting his phone down and gazing out at the moving fields. "Now I realize the competition was always with myself, everything else is just reference points." By the time we entered Yorkshire, it was fully dark. The distant hills loomed like crouching beasts, and the village lights were sparse. The streetlights outside the old house had been replaced with new LEDs, their white light gleaming on freshly painted fencing, far newer than the faded white gate I remembered. I pulled over and killed the engine. It ticked as it cooled, like the second hand of an old clock. Elliot unbuckled his seatbelt, paused with his hand on the door handle for an instant, then stepped out. The night wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth from the backyard, but beneath it, I caught the faint lingering smell of charcoal embers. Finn must have test-fired the grill already. The garden gate was ajar, a sliver of warm yellow light spilling through. As we unloaded the boot, the gate swung open from inside, and Finn's wife stood there in an apron, flour dusting her from collar to chin, hair rollers in place. She looked like she'd walked straight out of the bakery. When she saw us, she wiped her hands frantically on her apron, her lips quivered several times, and finally she blurted out, "The starter's been going for 3 days. I baked 6 burger buns today, they're not round." Elliot carried the sourdough box through the porch, bent down and picked up a lopsided bun that had rolled to his feet. He examined it for a couple of seconds. "Auntie, this one looks like Orion." He pointed out the irregular air pockets on the surface. "That's Canis Major, and that's Taurus." Finn's wife stood frozen, her eyes reddening instantly. She turned and hurried back into the kitchen, nearly tripping over her apron strings. The kitchen was steamy. Finn stood at the stove in an old apron printed with "I Red Heart Hash Barbecue" mixing sauce. His back looked more relaxed than at the interview last week, shoulder blades prominent under his cotton t-shirt, lean and gaunt. He turned at the sound of footsteps, still holding a whisk, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, but his mouth curved into a smile. I downloaded the sauce recipe online. It took 4 tries to get the sweet-sour balance right. He raised the whisk and shook it, splattering sauce onto the apron print. My cousin came clattering down the stairs in a faded hoodie, sleeves rolled up, fluorescent sticky notes wrapped around his fingers. "Cousin," he called out to Elliot, then immediately stopped, a little shy, glancing at me and lowering his voice. "Auntie, hello." I noticed the old scars on the inside of his wrist, from over-practicing piano, pale raised lines half covered by the sticky notes. Elliot pushed the sourdough box onto the table. "Code working?" My cousin nodded, then shook his head. "The visualization is stuck in the render loop. 2 errors left." Elliot slipped off his suit jacket and draped it over a chair, revealing a light gray hoodie beneath, instantly transforming from finance executive to coding coach. "Let's go take a look." I helped Finn's wife sort the ingredients in the kitchen. She kneaded the dough with more fluidity than the previous week. Her wrists turned with a soft, steady thump as the dough yielded on the board. Finn chopped tomatoes beside her, his knife work clumsy, slices uneven, juice splattering across half his apron. He stopped midway, set down the knife, and said, head bowed, "Sis, the night I sent that text, I waited all night for a reply. I thought you'd never speak to me again." I straightened the uneven tomato slices. I did think about never replying. But Elliot said something, those words can't hurt him anymore. "Finn, we spent 15 years getting to where we are now. It wasn't to keep holding on to resentment as fuel." His shoulders slumped. Tomato juice dripped from the cutting board onto the floor tiles, leaving dark red spots in the light. The night my company went into liquidation, I found a photo of Elliot's middle school astronomy award. My mother had secretly tucked it into her will documents and sent it to me. On the back she'd written, "Your brother, your sister's child, he could watch the stars till dawn." "What were you doing?" "Bragging about your new yacht at cocktail parties." Finn's voice grew quieter until it was barely a breath. "Only then did I realize that Mum left each of us something, a letter for you, 15 years of pocket money and an atlas for Elliot, and for me, a photo and 1 sentence." The kitchen extractor fan hummed, fragmenting and reassembling his last words. Finn's wife's kneading paused for half a second, then she pushed down harder, the board thumping dully. I said nothing, picked up an onion from the basket, and started peeling. The sharp sting hit my nose and I blinked. Suddenly, a whoop of delight came from upstairs. "It's working. Cousin, look at this render frame rate." Thumping footsteps descended, my cousin bounding down with his laptop, the screen displaying the astronomical star map visualization. Users could drag and rotate a 3D model of Orion, each star labeled with spectral type and distance. "I'll present this for the final," Elliot said, following behind, his hoodie sleeves pushed up, a wide grin on his face. He used my old telescope observation logs as data. "It's an Easter egg." I put down the onion, its rings scattered across the plate. My cousin set the laptop on the dining table and demonstrated the rotating star map. Finn's wife leaned in, getting flour on the screen. My cousin laughed, "Mum, don't touch it with wet hands." Finn wiped his fingers on his apron and clumsily clicked the mouse, letting out an O at the interactive feedback. The oven timer dinged, sourdough aroma wafted out, mingling with the pungent raw onion and the charred wood scent of the preheated grill, drifting through the open back door. In the backyard, the charcoal glowed orange-red, and fat sizzled as it dripped onto the double-deck grill. But this time the sound was mixed with my cousin's laughter as he adjusted the background music for the star map, and Finn's wife's footsteps as she carried trays out, her heels thudding on the wooden floor. Saturday evening, the light just fading, the Yorkshire sky unfurled like a silk scarf of indigo and blush pink. The cherry tree branches stretched into the twilight, strung with warm fairy lights that Grandfather had arranged to have hung, their tiny dots swaying in the breeze. Grandfather was wheeled out to the grill by my cousin, his lap rug revealing blue-striped pajama trousers. When he saw Elliot approaching, he leaned forward in his wheelchair, squinting, mumbling, tall, taller than the tree. Elliot crouched down and placed the cherry basket on grandfather's lap, plucked a dark red cherry from it and popped it into his mouth, cheeks bulging, and mumbled, "Grandad, this tree tastes just like it did when I was little." Grandfather clasped Elliot's fingers with his good hand and held them for a long time, long enough for the burger patties on the grill to be flipped once. Pine charcoal crackled and popped, sparks flying to the edge of the grate and dying out. Aunt sat on a bench under the cherry tree, scarf wrapped up to her nose, staring into the Orion projection that flickered on the garden wall. Finn loaded the first batch of burgers onto the sourdough buns and carried the tray around to everyone, a quarter for grandfather, no onions for Aunt, an extra slice of cheese for my cousin. When I took my burger, my fingers brushed Finn's hand. His skin was rough, warmed by the charcoal smoke. The first bite, the slight chew of the sourdough, the rich fat of the wagyu, the sweet sour tang of the sauce all exploded on my tongue, a sensory and emotional echo of that afternoon 15 years ago when I'd left clutching an empty plate. Elliot stood by the cherry tree, taking a huge bite, his cheeks puffed out, giving me a thumbs up, his amber eyes reflecting the fairy lights and the star projection intertwined. My cousin adjusted the projection to cast directly above the backyard, so Orion's points fell among the cherry leaves, flickering with the breeze. He turned up the volume on his laptop, switching the background music to an old folk tune one grandma used to hum, a Yorkshire country melody he must have dug up from some old file. As the melody flowed through the dusk, Finn's wife leaned against the kitchen doorframe, her hand over her mouth. Finn stood with his back to everyone at the grill, shoulders shaking. From Aunt's bench came muffled sobs, grandfather's grip on Elliot's hand tightened. I stood amidst these sounds, my star-shaped sapphire warmed by the dying embers, pressed against my collarbone. That night 15 years ago, sitting alone on the floor of that Leeds basement apartment, deleting every contact, I never imagined I'd one day stand on this same lawn, same spot, same charcoal smoke filling the air, but now holding a fully laden burger instead of an empty plate. Standing beside a son grown into a tall tree instead of a trembling toddler, hearing not jeers and laughter but folk melodies and the satisfied murmurs of relatives enjoying their food. The projection shifted to the next constellation, Canis Major, Sirius glowing white cold on the garden wall. My cousin ran over and crouched beside grandfather's wheelchair, pointing at the blinking star. "Grandad, Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky. It's actually 25 times more luminous than the sun." Grandfather stared at the light for a long moment, then said in his slurred voice, "Elliot, is that one?" He raised his good hand, trembling, pointing at Sirius, then slowly moved his finger to a dim red dot in the corner of the projection. "And that is Grandad." Elliot folded his burger wrapper into a neat square, crouched on grandfather's other side. "Grandad, every star in Orion is important, otherwise the belt wouldn't be complete." He said this without looking at his grandfather, instead gazing at the real stars above. Light pollution was low in the Yorkshire countryside, and the Milky Way stretched thinly across the sky like a sprinkling of fine salt. Grandfather sobbed into his lap rug, his fingers still locked around Elliot's wrist. Finn brought the second batch of chicken wings over to my cousin and aunt. As he passed me, he murmured, "Sis, when I said unworthy that year, I was really talking about myself. I'd just been warned by the board about falling performance. I was terrified, and the only way I could pretend to be steady was by stepping on others." The sticky caramelized sauce dripped from the tray onto the grass, dotting it with dark spots like full stops. I took a wing tip from him and bit into it, sweet and spicy, tingling on my tongue. When Elliot was 12, he observed an asteroid and submitted a report to the International Astronomical Union. They didn't name it after him, but he lay on the garage roof and told me, "Mum, I found something nobody's ever looked at." "Finn, you couldn't see him back then because you had no light in your own eyes." Finn set the tray on the picnic table with a dull thud. He stood there, staring at Elliot's profile as he crouched by grandfather's wheelchair. The folk song reached its chorus, a woman singing, "When the stars go out, the fire still burns." He sniffed, turned back to the grill, and laid down the next batch of patties. The crackle of the charcoal drowned out whatever he hadn't said. As night deepened, my cousin brought out the triple-layer molten chocolate cake, dusted with gold powder and cherry crumbles, glowing like miniature volcanoes under the fairy lights. As we gathered around the picnic table to share the cake, Aunt suddenly raised her fork and tapped the edge of her empty plate, a clear clink that silenced everyone. "I have something to say today," she said, her stroke-slurred voice slow but each word deliberate. 15 years ago, in this backyard, I didn't speak up to defend you. Today I will. Elliot is a good boy, he always was. We were the blind ones." She pointed the fork at her own eyes, then at Finn. Finn kept his head down, cutting the cake, the knife scraping against the plate. My cousin was the first to raise her glass of lemonade. My cousin, the boy, followed. Finn's wife lifted her water glass with flour-dusty hands. Grandfather tremulously raised a cherry pit, and finally Finn raised his glass, clinking it against mine, a light ding, like the ticking of a clock. I raised my lemonade and looked at Elliot. He was digging into the molten center of the cake with surgical precision, measuring each mouthful's lava content. Catching my eye, he winked, and his lips moved silently. I read the word, "worth it." Worth it. I let the word rest on my tongue, then washed it down with the tart lemonade. The night wind scattered and gathered the warmth of the dying embers. The fairy lights in the cherry tree stretched everyone's shadows across the lawn, overlapping and interlocking, like a jigsaw puzzle of broken and reconnected bonds finally coming together on a two-dimensional plane. My cousin switched the projection to a real-time satellite view. Earth's continents rotated slowly on the garden wall, green landmasses and deep blue oceans passing alternately over everyone's shoulders. Finn's wife suddenly jumped up and ran into the kitchen, returning with a round dish covered by a tea towel. As she lifted the towel, a burst of rich wheaty aroma filled the air. Beneath it sat a perfectly round, golden-brown sourdough loaf, its scoring cut into a star-shaped radial pattern. "I practiced for 6 days," she said, rubbing the flour crusts on her fingers. "Today this one finally came out round, and the star on top is for Elliot." Elliot took the loaf, studied it for a long time. Then he broke off a piece and put it in his mouth, chewing slowly, his eyes reddened. He placed the bread on his plate and tapped the surface 3 times with his fork. I suddenly recognized that as our secret signal from when he was little, 3 taps meaning "Mummy loves you." He turned to Finn's wife, his voice a little tight. "Auntie, can this bread be patented?" Finn's wife blinked, then laughed through her tears. Her fingers, which had kneaded dough for 6 days without trembling, now raised her fork and tapped back 4 times, the rhythm she used to soothe her son when he was upset. My cousin pulled out his phone and recorded the scene, the shaky lens sweeping over the messy plates, chicken wing bones, cherry pits rolling at the edge of the grass, half a napkin draped over grandfather's wheelchair armrest, finally settling on Elliot breaking off pieces of bread to share with grandfather and aunt. As midnight approached, people began to clear up. My cousin drove aunt back to the nursing home, a carer wheeled grandfather inside. My cousin, the boy, carried his laptop upstairs to tweak a few more code details. Finn's wife hummed that folk tune while washing the dishes in the kitchen. Finn crouched in the backyard, extinguishing the charcoal, scattering the embers with long tongs and pouring half a bucket of water. Steam rose, carrying the smell of charred wood and roasted meat. Elliot and I sat side by side on the bench under the cherry tree, the night chill seeping through our linen trousers, the fairy lights still glowing above us, Orion slowly sliding past the treetops, its real movement alongside the static projection on the wall. "Mum," Elliot said suddenly, his voice thin in the night breeze, "I figured something out last night. Uncle's unworthy was never really aimed at me, it was aimed at his own fear. I don't need his apology to move forward, but I accept his change because..." He paused, drawing a circle on his knee with his finger. "Because people deserve a second chance." I turned to look at his profile in the dim light. The fairy lights cast a small warm patch on his cheekbone. "That night you were 5, as I walked out with our empty plates, I thought I'll give you a second chance, not from relatives, but from life itself. Now you've given that back to everyone." From the kitchen came Finn's wife's off-key humming, mingled with the crisp clatter of my cousin's keyboard. Finn walked back from the corner of the yard carrying an empty bucket, paused by the bench, standing 2 feet away on the grass, and after a moment's hesitation said, "Elliot, that quantum model project, does the shortlist of UK partners include the company I introduced?" Elliot turned to him, moonlight silvering his irises. "Yes. Their CTO read your CV and interview notes. They said your case study on cash flow analysis was very thorough." He stood and walked over to Finn. The height difference meant Finn had to look up slightly. Uncle, being shortlisted doesn't mean winning the bid. But at least you've got a ticket in. Finn's grip on the bucket tightened. Condensation from the metal dripped through his fingers onto the grass. That's enough, he said, his voice rough but with an upward lift. A ticket is enough. He turned and walked inside, his pace quicker than when he'd come out, his back straighter. The kitchen light spilled through the doorway, casting his long shadow across the grass, overlapping and diverging from Elliot's like two rays that had split from the same origin and now finally intersected again. The bench boards were damp with dew. Elliot sat back down, shifting closer to me, his shoulder leaning in, carrying the mingled scents of sourdough and charcoal. The star projection had been remotely switched by my cousin to a time-lapse of Grandma's favorite star trail, Orion sweeping across the sky from east to west, the accelerated starlight leaving silver-white arcs, as if someone were writing and erasing across the night sky with chalk. I checked my phone, 1:17 a.m. The family group chat had dozens of new messages. At the top, Aunt had posted a photo of herself in her nursing home bed, holding the half-eaten sourdough and giving a V sign, with the caption, "More knife practice tomorrow." Below, my cousin replied with a string of laughing emojis. Grandfather sent a voice message that, when played, was just a slurred repetition of good, good. Finn's wife shared a video of her son humming while typing code, with the caption, "He says he'll use the backyard star map as his case study for the presentation." I put my phone away. The night breeze rustled the cherry leaves. Elliot had leaned back against the bench, eyes closed, breathing even and deep, the slight frown between his brows relaxed in sleep. I studied his profile in the moonlight, those features once dismissed as average now formed a steady jawline, a brow that furrowed in concentration, a left eye that crinkled first when he smiled. The star-shaped sapphire at my neck lay against my collarbone, rising and falling with his breath, like a tamed, finally quiet heartbeat. The smell of burnt wood faded under the dew, replaced by the earthy scent of soil and grass and the last traces of cherry fragrance. I heard Finn's wife say softly from inside, "The water's ready," and Finn's low reply, "Coming." Upstairs, the keyboard fell silent, followed by a long, satisfied yawn. The sound of Grandfather's wheelchair being rolled into the bedroom, the tap of Aunt's walking stick left against the porch, all these sounds receded like grains of sand after the tide, leaving a faint itch on my eardrums. I stayed on the bench, watching the star trail loop play for the fourth time, Orion crossing the imaginary sky for the third time. In the same backyard 15 years ago, a cold seed had been buried in the charcoal embers. Now the flower that had grown from its ashes was being illuminated by these tiny sounds and starlight, the lopsided sourdough, the imperfect burger buns, Grandfather's slurred good, my cousin's off-key humming, and Finn's grip on the tongs that had steadied after trembling again and again. Elliot leaned more heavily against my shoulder in his sleep, his warm breath brushing my linen sleeve. I reached up and gently smoothed the hair from his forehead, my fingertips brushed his scalp, and he mumbled indistinctly, "Mum," tweaked the star map parameters by one order of magnitude, clearly still navigating the star map in his dream. I didn't pull my hand away, letting it rest on his hair. The fairy lights in the yard swayed slightly in the late breeze, the projection automatically cycled to the next loop, and Orion's belt stars brightened then faded on the wall. One by one, the house lights went out, leaving only the warm yellow light in the kitchen, probably left on for anyone coming in late. I reached for Grandma's astronomy atlas at the edge of the bench and opened it. The flyleaf inscription, "To the brightest star," glowed faded blue in the moonlight. I turned to the Orion page. In the margin was Elliot's 8-year-old pencil drawing of a stick figure observer, with the wobbly note beside it, "Grandma with me." From the kitchen came Finn's wife's off-key humming, mingled with the crisp clatter of my cousin's keyboard. Finn walked back from the corner of the yard carrying an empty bucket, paused by the bench, standing 2 feet away on the grass, and after a moment's hesitation said, "Elliot, that quantum model project, does the shortlist of UK partners include the company I introduced?" Elliot turned to him, moonlight silvering his irises. "Yes. Their CTO read your CV and interview notes. They said your case study on cash flow analysis was very thorough." He stood and walked over to Finn. The height difference meant Finn had to look up slightly. "Uncle, being shortlisted doesn't mean winning the bid. But at least you've got a ticket in." Finn's grip on the bucket tightened. Condensation from the metal dripped through his fingers onto the grass. "That's enough," he said, his voice rough but with an upward lift. "A ticket is enough." He turned and walked inside, his pace quicker than when he'd come out, his back straighter. The kitchen light spilled through the doorway, casting his long shadow across the grass, overlapping and diverging from Elliot's like two rays that had split from the same origin and now finally intersected again. The bench boards were damp with dew. Elliot sat back down, shifting closer to me, his shoulder leaning in, carrying the mingled scents of sourdough and charcoal. The star projection had been remotely switched by my cousin to a time-lapse of Grandma's favorite star trail, Orion sweeping across the sky from east to west, the accelerated starlight leaving silver-white arcs, as if someone were writing and erasing across the night sky with chalk. I checked my phone, 1:17 a.m. The family group chat had dozens of new messages. At the top, Aunt had posted a photo of herself in her nursing home bed, holding the half-eaten sourdough and giving a V sign, with the caption, "More knife practice tomorrow." Below, my cousin replied with a string of laughing emojis. Grandfather sent a voice message that, when played, was just a slurred repetition of good, good. Finn's wife shared a video of her son humming while typing code, with the caption, "He says he'll use the backyard star map as his case study for the presentation." I put my phone away. The night breeze rustled the cherry leaves. Elliot had leaned back against the bench, eyes closed, breathing even and deep, the slight frown between his brows relaxed in sleep. I studied his profile in the moonlight, those features once dismissed as average now formed a steady jawline, a brow that furrowed in concentration, a left eye that crinkled first when he smiled. The star-shaped sapphire at my neck lay against my collarbone, rising and falling with his breath, like a tamed, finally quiet heartbeat. The smell of burnt wood faded under the dew, replaced by the earthy scent of soil and grass and the last traces of cherry fragrance. I heard Finn's wife say softly from inside, "The water's ready," and Finn's low reply, "Coming." Upstairs, the keyboard fell silent, followed by a long, satisfied yawn. The sound of Grandfather's wheelchair being rolled into the bedroom, the tap of Aunt's walking stick left against the porch, all these sounds receded like grains of sand after the tide, leaving a faint itch on my eardrums. I stayed on the bench, watching the Star Trail loop play for the fourth time, Orion crossing the imaginary sky for the third time. In the same backyard 15 years ago, a cold seed had been buried in the charcoal embers. Now the flower that had grown from its ashes was being illuminated by these tiny sounds and starlight, the lopsided sourdough, the imperfect burger buns, Grandfather's slurred good, my cousin's off-key humming, and Finn's grip on the tongs that had steadied after trembling again and again. Elliot leaned more heavily against my shoulder in his sleep, his warm breath brushing my linen sleeve. I reached up and gently smoothed the hair from his forehead, my fingertips brushed his scalp, and he mumbled indistinctly, "Mum," tweaked the star map parameters by one order of magnitude, clearly still navigating the star map in his dream. I didn't pull my hand away, letting it rest on his hair. The fairy lights in the yard swayed slightly in the late breeze, the projection automatically cycled to the next loop, and Orion's belt stars brightened then faded on the wall. One by one, the house lights went out, leaving only the warm yellow light in the kitchen, probably left on for anyone coming in late. I reached for Grandma's astronomy atlas at the edge of the bench and opened it. The flyleaf inscription, "To the brightest star," glowed faded blue in the moonlight. I turned to the Orion page. In the margin was Elliot's 8-year-old pencil drawing of a stick figure observer, with the wobbly note beside it, "Grandma with me."